Hello everyone, Gashbad here. Originally this was going to be one long video. I was going to take you guys through my entire process of painting a miniature. But perhaps unsurprisingly, that video ended up being really long, so I'm breaking it into two parts. This is the first part where I talk about the early stages where I'm just prepping the model. Cleaning it, gluing it, converting it, basing it, and putting the undercoat on it. The second part will come a little bit later when I actually paint the model. The miniature in question that I'm going to be using will be this Plaguebearer here in the center. This is me talking from the future after the model is all done and everything. But since I've already said that this video runs a little bit longer than I'd like, let's get right to it. And the first thing that we do is we're going to take out our files and our X-Acto blade. So these are just regular hobby files. You can pick them up at any craft store. This is just a regular X-Acto blade. And none of these are very special. Anything will really do. The X-Acto blade is just for the larger tabs and things that you can find on models. The files I use for pretty much everything, including plastic. A lot of people use these special scrapers or use the X-Acto blade exclusively. I find the files work pretty well for plastic as well. This model is actually pretty good. I don't see a lot that I need to file down. Maybe that horn could use a little work. You're just looking down the center line and seeing what needs to get adjusted and just filing it down. You don't need to be as exact with this as you do for some other methods of painting, because we're using relatively thick paints and because we're not relying on washes and glazes and dry brushes so much that are going to pick out every little detail. You don't need to be as picky about this as you do with some other techniques. The more work you do here, the easier it's going to be, but you don't need to go crazy. And of course, don't forget the base. There's usually a little trim of flash along the very bottom of the base. I frequently take the X-Acto blade and run the edge along there to trim that out. It looks like it's already been done in this case. Usually I do this before I glue the model to the base. In this case I glued it on previously. And like I said, this one's actually in pretty good shape. There wasn't a whole lot to do. Maybe the last person that painted this, you can still see little remains of the old paint job that I had to strip off here. Anyway, that's all for that. I'm going to break out the green stuff and we'll get going on some small conversions. Once we've cleaned up all the flash and mold lines and that sort of thing on our model and we've attached it to the base, I use just regular old crazy glue. It's time to do some green stuff. Now, sometimes you'll have to use green stuff to fill in some gaps on your model if you're using a plastic model or a multi-piece metal model. Sometimes you want to make small conversions. Really often I don't change my models around at all. It's usually not necessary. These things are usually so nice that they're good just as they are. But this is just me showing you my process in case there's something you want to do. In this case, I'm basing these Plaguebearers, this Nurgle army that I'm working on in the background, on the biblical plagues. I know that doesn't sound very original, but I haven't seen anyone doing that before. And so I'm going to make this group of Plaguebearers the Boils division. I'm going to add a couple more warts and boils on these guys. They've already got some, they need to have more. So I got some green stuff. In this case, it's the Army Painter stuff. I've used a bunch of different green stuff over the years. Got two little globs, I'm just mixing it together while I talk. I haven't found a difference between them. They've all worked well, they've all been fine. I've used Reaper, I've used GW, they all seem about the same. I think you're good with whatever you choose. The tool that I primarily use, I mean sometimes I use different stuff, but I got this old dental tool right here. It's got that little flat roundish end and then a little blade end. And of course, use whatever you feel like. Anything that makes a mark can be used. And so we got a little glob of that. Recently, when I have been using green stuff, I have gotten in the habit of once I am done with the thing that I'm modeling, whatever is left over, whatever globs of green stuff I have left, I roll up into tiny little balls like this. And I just save them. And I save them for projects like this. So I'm gonna pour out a couple there. I'm gonna whack a couple in half like this. There we go. There's one I already cut in half. Here's another one. Okay, so I got some little half pieces. I'm gonna pull off a little glob. Where should the boils on this guy go? Maybe down the side of his face. So I'm gonna take my little glob of green stuff, stick that there, wet my tool, try and I'm just going to spread out a little glob of it along the side of his face. Once I got a rough patch there, I'm just going to take one of these half spheres that I've cut. Just going to stick, oh that's a nice big one, that'll be gross. Yeah, just stick it onto that glob of green stuff. Press it down and start smoothing it out. He needs another one. He needs more boils. There's a little one. That'll work. Let's see. There we go. On the side of his head like that. And then I just clean up the edges a bit. I think 2 boils for the side of his face will be okay. Trying to maneuver my hands around the microphone. Got a new setup, a new layout. Got a bunch of really old cheap electronics stitched together that I'm experimenting with. Okay. So there's 2 boils there. I'm going to add a bunch more of these. Hopefully you get the idea, and then we'll check back in after all that is done. I give these things about 8 hours to cure. That's probably longer than I need, but I like having just these general time frames. I don't got to think about it. So I'm going to model this up, wait for 8 hours, we'll go on to the next step. Lots of nice boils and blisters. So he's thoroughly wartified. It's now time to work on the base, and nothing marks you out as an Oldhammer player than a nice sand base. Now I could have taken green stuff and I could have filled in this little slot that we have on the base. Some of the older and even some of the newer ones have these, but it's kind of a waste of green stuff. Not that green stuff is really that expensive, but you know what's cheaper is masking tape, and it works just as well. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to tear off a little chunk of regular old masking tape, and I'm just going to stick it on to the slot right there, the excess with my X-Acto blade. So I'm just going to do that for all the open gaps on the model, and then I'll check back in with you once that is done. So now that we have the gap taped over, time to add the sand. So here is a little bowl of fine playground sand. So I bought a giant bag of this stuff a long time ago. I've used hardly any of it. And so we're just going to take a bit of that. Normally all I do is spread out some regular old white glue, PVA glue, onto the base, coat it with sand, and there you go. And then I paint it green, and that's your standard 80s, 90s green base for Warhammer models. This one though, I'm going to be doing a bit of a desert theme for the model. Wet my brush. I'm going to spread around some of this glue while I talk. I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm doing a desert base, but because I want this to kind of tie in with the rest of my models when they're fighting each other, or if I combine different demon forces, I am going to put a little grass in spots on the sand of the base, on the not the actual sand, but the the painted as sand. So it's going to be a desert base with sand with a couple little spotches of grass on it. So in order to do that, you can see I've got the worst brush that I can find. That's okay. Painting this way ruins a lot of brushes, so you never run out of brushes in bad condition to use for things like spreading glue around or mixing paint. This is just one of the slightly larger ones that I've ruined, so that's what I'm doing. Give it a nice coat all around. And then so my first layer of turf texture, I'm going to use a little section of sand in here that looks a little bit finer than the rest. So I'm just going to go in here, and here's a little pinch without too many coarse materials. I'm just going to sprinkle it on very lightly like that. And so that layer will be the sand texture, the desert texture. I'm going to give this an hour to dry. Will it take an hour? Maybe, but again, I just use generalized time frames. Half an hour for a wash, 1 hour for white glue, 8 hours for green stuff. You know, just I don't really want to think about it. So, there that is. I'm going to let that dry, then I'm going to come back in for the grass turf. So it's been about an hour. Our PVA glue should be dried. So we're going to go and we're going to brush off the excess sand from that first coat, and then we're going to put on a few spots of sand to represent the grass. And let's see. Where should we put it? We'll put a spot maybe around there. Where else? I put some big spots on the last couple of Plaguebearers I did, so maybe this time I'll just do a couple small ones. Maybe one more right in the middle, just like that. I'm picking spots where there's already some coarser sand so that the stuff that I'm actually going to paint sand color will be fairly fine. Okay. Then with that, I can just go and grab a couple pinches of sand. I can use the coarser stuff for this, doesn't really matter. And there you go. We're going to wait 1 more hour. Okay, basing stuff is done. I'm going to brush off the excess sand as usual. And now we're finally ready to start putting some paint on the model. And of course, the first thing that we got to do is we got to put on an undercoat. Just helps all the paint stick on the model. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an old cardboard box. I'm going to take some regular blue tape like this. I'm going to make a little loop. There's of course a million ways to do all this. This is just my way. Do whatever works. I'm just going to stick it on the corner of the box. Let's take a look. And so, yeah. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach the model like this. I'm going to spray the outside of the model. Then I'm going to tip it over like that. I'm going to catch the underside just to get paint on the little areas that I missed on the first go around. And then finally, same thing, flip it over like that, spray it like that. So, what color spray paint will I use? What primer? Well, I'm going to make it real easy for you. We're going to use black. Always going to use black. Well, won't that, make lighter colors hard to put down? No, not really, because we're going to use really cheap craft paint. and it's going to cover fairly well. And even if it doesn't cover great, we're going to put like 5 layers of highlights on the thing. You're not going to have any problems getting a really light color. So you might as well just use your Citadel Chaos Black spray paint. I've tried other undercoat spray paints. I like the Citadel stuff. It's expensive, but the other stuff I've had, it's never worked quite as well. Some of it doesn't cure completely. It ends up being sticky or tacky. I've never had a bad can of it, and I don't know, I think you gotta be crazy to try regular spray paint on something with as fine detail as these models. And again, you're gonna be putting thick paint on these models, so really you're probably better off using a nice thin spray paint to start with. And there you have it, the model is all set up and ready to paint in this particular Oldhammer style. Join me for that next video if that's something that you're interested in. Leave a comment below if you have any questions, observations, or concerns, and I will see you on the next one.